Welcome to the Range Africa Level Up Workshop series. We at Range Africa are passionate about empowering entrepreneurs through our software solutions and community education incentives. This is the third installment of the workshop series, and today is all about branding. I shall be your presenter for the session, and my name is Carrie. Today we will cover the fundamentals of branding. You shall understand what branding is, what it entails, various myths and misconceptions, and you shall get a guide on how to fill out your brand style guide, also known as the brand book. But before we start, we need to break some hearts and bust some myths. The first being some definitions. What is a brand? A brand is something that helps people identify a person, company, or product. Today, we are not going to use brand and business interchangeably because a brand and a business are two different things. What is brand awareness? This is the extent to which customers are able to identify, recall, and recognize a brand, so how familiar they are with the brand. If you have low brand awareness, this is a sales and marketing problem. So if you are asking questions like how do you get your brand out there, how do you get more people to recognize your brand, that is a sales and marketing issue, and branding will not fix that. What is brand recognition? This is the extent to which customers can correctly identify the brand, and it primarily involves visual cues to notice the brand. So if you have low brand recognition, it could either be a brand identity problem, and yes, branding can fix that, or it is a sales and marketing problem. What is brand marketing? So, this is a type of marketing which aims to build a relationship between the customer and the brand. So, brand marketing is not branding, it is simply a marketing style. What is brand positioning? This is a unique value proposition that a brand presents to the customer. So, it can guide branding, but it is not decided during the branding process. This happens during the planning phase. So, it is not involved in branding. So, branding will not help you discover your brand positioning. What will help you do this is filling out something like the unique value proposition canvas. What is a business or a brand strategy? A business strategy is a plan that you put in place for your business, and it is different to a brand strategy. A brand strategy is used to shape the brand perception and how the brand is identified, and this involves your marketing team. So, branding, brand identity, and brand image shall all be defined later on. But first, let's talk about some common misconceptions. There are 8 common misconceptions that came up when we reviewed the results from our survey. The first being, I do not have a brand until I make one. The second, my brand will bring sales. The third, my brand creates my unique value proposition. The fourth, branding and marketing are the same. The fifth, only big companies need a brand. The sixth, I have to have the best brand or a unique brand. The seventh, branding is just a logo or a name. And finally, the eighth, branding is logical. So these are all misconceptions, and I'm going to break down why. So the first reason that this is a misconception is that the moment you begin engaging with customers, and this can be one-way communication, so the customer has visited your Instagram page, you have a brand. The difference between you and another business that is actively involved in their branding is that you're leaving the definition of your brand up to public perception, or essentially the public is going to decide what kind of brand you have without any of your influence. And this can be very unhelpful for your business and your business goals. Only big companies do not need brands. Branding starts from the ground up. So when you're smaller and as you grow, that's why these larger companies have more established brands, because this is something that they have worked on over time. So although branding does influence sales, and we will talk about it, branding does not bring sales. If you're having very low sales, this might not be a branding problem, and you would have to look at your sales funnel or your sales pipeline. If you feel like you have to have the best brand or the most unique brand, that is incorrect. What you need is the most effective brand. And an effective brand is one that resonates with your target market and helps you meet your business goals. So you do not need to be the best or the most unique, you simply need to be effective. Branding obviously does not create your value proposition, and we have already talked about that. And branding is not just a logo or a name. It actually has various other elements, and we will discuss that much more further on in this session. Branding is not only logical, it is also psychological and emotional because we are appealing to people. And as people, we are not often as rational as we believe, and we do go based on how we feel about things or the kind of impression things have on us. Branding and marketing are definitely not the same, though branding is an element under marketing. So branding cannot make up for a bad product or service experience. It cannot make up for poor ideation and validation. It cannot make up for your poor understanding of your market. In fact, a poor understanding of your market will lead to ineffective branding, and it cannot make up for very low sales. Very low sales is a sales funnel problem. So branding is not marketing, so it will not replace marketing efforts. It will not be your answer to low sales. It is not your answer to a small market. And yes, it can be part of the answer, but it is not the solution. Something that we need to carry forward with us throughout the rest of the series is you cannot use the wrong tools to solve certain problems. You need to make sure you choose the correct tool when you're attempting to solve business problems. Being on social media is not branding. Yes, having an online presence is an element of marketing and allows you to build your brand visibility and brand awareness, but your Instagram page, your TikTok page, etc., even your website, if you have a website, is not branding or a brand. And branding is not a quick process, it is perpetual. Therefore, branding will not start and stop with your brand book, it will continue. And especially as you're growing throughout the years with your business, you're going to make small adjustments to your brand over time so that you can make it a lot better and resonate with your customers. So, what is branding? Let's understand what branding really is without the gimmicks. So, branding is a process of creating an identity for your business. Think of it as turning your business into an entity or a being. And the aim is to make sure that people understand and recognize your brand. So, we'll have two basic components of branding: the brand identity. So, these are the visual elements and cues that you have control over, and the brand image, which is the perception of your brand. Your brand is essentially who you are, plus who you want to be, plus what or who your customers perceive. So, if you want to brand your product or service line, that branding would include the product identity and the customer's perception of the product or line of service. So, benefits of branding are six, or these are the top benefits that we have identified here at Range. The first being that the business can build a relationship with customers. So, businesses overall are quite impersonal and quite hard to form a relationship with. But the brand, which is essentially the entity that we've created to represent the business, that is something that customers and the general public can begin to relate to. They can begin to form a relationship with it. And this leads to a variety of other benefits. And we'll talk about how these benefits are linked. But it's really important to understand that without a brand, you cannot form a relationship with your customers and your target market. And second is that it attracts talent. So the stronger this relationship is with your customers and the stronger your brand, which we'll talk about in a second, the more talent you are going to attract. So it's not going to be so hard for you to hire because you're going to start attracting talent within your industry and attracting people who essentially resonate with what your business stands for, simply because they resonate with your brand. The third is that your brand can become a competitive advantage. So your brand can lead to things like referrals or make it easier to roll out products, etc. And this can help you stand out against your competitors. So when we think of the concept of standing out as a brand, a lot of us think of standing out in terms of visuals. So standing out in terms of your labels, your packaging, your office space, etc. But that isn't the main thing, or as I would say, it's not the tipping point of quote unquote standing out. The main thing is how your brand's relationship with customers impacts and influences your business goals in comparison to, if your brand was, I say, less effective. So with a more effective brand, your business goals can be better furthered. And that is what helps you to stand out and helps you be more competitive. The fourth is building trust and credibility within the market. So, this, of course, is built on the foundation of that relationship, but also depending on how you go about branding. So, for example, the types of fonts you choose, the type of colors you choose, etc. This can help influence people into viewing you as credible or trustworthy. It can also, depending on how you go about it, make people feel averse to you or like they do not want to work with you. So when you're building trust and credibility, a lot of people, a lot of business owners, we will tend to lean towards making things appear very corporate, very official, but we forget that last element, which is within the market. So when you're building trust and credibility, you want to look at what does your market find trustworthy? What does your market find credible? And you want to lean with that. So if you're not a B2B business, for example, you don't want to brand like a B2B business. You want to brand and target your end consumer. So let's say your end consumer is somebody who is creative, somebody who is very passionate about different projects and different things in the creative world, you would want to brand for them and have them in mind because they might not appreciate B2B style branding. Branding can also attract new customers. So, the more effective you are with your brand, the more likely you are to attract new customers within your market. Of course, we've already spoken about the element of referrals, making it very easy to refer your products. But of course, if you have products that are stacked on a shelf somewhere, depending on how you take the visual cues and visual elements of that branding for your product line or for your business, it can attract new customers because they are visually appealing. And finally, branding can open doors and opportunities. So when you're looking at the power of branding, depending on how you lean into your brand positioning, how you build trust and credibility, how you further and allow yourself to have these relationships with your customers, they can open doors and opportunities for you as a business. And that's very important, especially when you are a small business, because a lot of people will not open the doors for you that they would open for more established companies. So you really need to put in the extra effort to brand in a manner that allows you to enter the spaces that would benefit you or allow you to further your cause. So, are you not yet convinced? If you're not yet convinced, let's talk about brand equity. So, brand equity is the value of your brand and the level of influence your brand has on customers. And it includes the perception of your brand, product value, and desirability. The factors that involve brand equity are brand loyalty, awareness, perceived quality, and brand associations. So, brand associations are the things that come to people's minds when they think of your brand. So, this could be feelings, different worldviews, maybe your slogan or your tagline or colors. But most of the time, it is a feeling or a perspective. And none of these factors are possible without branding. And none of these factors, I must add, um, should be left without your influence as the business. You need to make sure that you're influencing as much as you can these brand associations, for example. The top benefits of having a strong brand equity or a high brand equity are that it facilitates for company long-term growth. So for those of you who are asking about longevity, brand equity is the answer to that. It also leads to increased profit in two ways. The first being that brands with higher or businesses with higher brand equity have the benefit of being able to have increased profit margins because people will be more likely to spend more on them. Furthermore, they'll also attract more customers because they're viewed in a more positive light, and that will lead to increased sales. And finally, being able to roll out products because of that increased trust will lead to more increased sales, perhaps new customers, and that will also lead to increased profit. There'll also be a sense of increased loyalty because the higher your brand equity, meaning the higher or the better people perceive you, the more loyalty that you'll get. And loyalty comes in three ways, which we'll break down further down or later on in the slides. So if you are asking, how do I get a strong brand? The question is actually, how do I get high brand equity? It's important to note that you can have a positive brand equity and a negative brand equity as well. So let's get to work and understand what is brand image and what is brand identity. These are the two core elements that make up the concept of branding. So brand image, as we already know, is the perspective somebody has in your brand. But let's dive a little deeper. It is how each person views the identity, purpose, and value of brands that they interact with and potentially engage with. Brand image is subjective, so this means that it changes from person to person. Therefore, you cannot control your brand image, but you can implement a strategy that will help influence it. Benefits of a good brand image are: one, authority and credibility. More people will view your brand as credible and trustworthy in the market. In addition, they may think of you as an authority within your industry. The second is customer loyalty. So, as I said, loyalty comes in two parts. So, the first being repeat purchases, and the second being advocacy. So, advocacy comes in the form of testimonials or referrals. Okay, so that is how we are defining loyalty. So once you have a strong brand image or a good brand image and customers have a good perception of your brand, they're more likely to follow these acts of loyalty. We also have increased sales. So increased brand recognition and customer relatability will lead to increased sales and revenue. In addition, it will make it easier to roll out new products. So it will not lead to initial sales, especially if you're just starting out, but it can boost what you currently have. So we need to understand that when it comes to brand image, the customer is always king. So customer experience from beginning to end will always influence how your customer views your brand and what they're going to tell the rest of your market. Therefore, the basis of your brand image strategy should revolve around customer experience. And you need to make sure that you are ensuring that your customers have as positive an experience as possible. If we're looking at the simplified customer journey, each area within this journey requires your attention and some kind of action from yourself and your team to ensure that your customers have the best experience possible. So if we're looking at first impressions, so they're landing on your social media page or your website page for the first time, or they're hearing about you for the first time, what you have in your control is the pages and the content that they're met with. And you need to have a strategy placed there. You need to make sure that your content reflects things or reflects your brand well. The second is the interaction with your team and brand. So the interaction that they're having with your brand representatives and your team, primarily during the inquiries phase or during some kind of two-way communication. Maybe they've called and they're talking to your sales team. Maybe this is a meeting. This interaction is the second step of the journey. And of course, you need to have some kind of strategy in place here. The third is the purchase of the product or service. A lot of small businesses focus on this area, forgetting the others. So you focus on driving to the actual sale and driving to the purchase, but it also needs to have a more empathetic element of it. So it's not just about driving the sale, but also about ensuring that your customer has the most comfortable experience possible. Then we have the post-purchase experience. If you have a service, for example, your coaching business, this would be what happens after the 3 coaching sessions. What happens then? If you're selling a product, what happens after they have received that pair of shoes, for example? So the post-purchase experience includes things like having to return an item, refunds, their experience with the quality of your product, the impact in their lives later on. So you want to have a neutral or at least a positive post-purchase experience. You want to definitely avoid having a negative one. And all of this leads up to your final impression, which will definitely be influenced by all of the steps before in this journey. A few more ways that you can improve your brand image are being open to collecting feedback, especially criticism, and being intentional with collecting feedback. So stop trying to collect feedback at the end of every year, or you can try and collect feedback at the end of every sale. Whether or not people respond is up to them, but for those that do take the time to respond, take their feedback very seriously and see what you can do in the following year. Focus on becoming 1% better. So implement changes slowly over time and focus on one change at a time. So, for example, one change every month or one change every 6 weeks or 2 months before you move on to the next one. This way you'll know what is working and you will be able to avoid what is not working. You also need to take the time and hold yourself accountable. So sometimes an apology is all that is needed. And a lot of brands will focus on saving face, and all this does is alienate your customers. Sometimes it is okay to say sorry and hold yourself accountable. A really great formula for apologies is the last method. So the L stands for listen, the A stands for apologize. So even if you feel that you are not on the wrong, you can still apologize, for example, for the experience that the customer has had. The S stands for solve. If you cannot solve the problem, you need to tell them that you'll talk to somebody who will solve it. And the T stands for time. So you need to tell them how long will it take for this to be resolved, or how long until you will get back to them. And you need to stay true to that time. So the last method. Beware of the biggest killers of brand image, social media. So, small business owners everywhere, your social media account is not a hobby page, it's not a place to air your grievances. You need to stop. Your social media page is how your customers will form those first impressions of you. So if you're having fights in the comments, if you're airing customer drama, if you're having rants on socials, that is going to make your potential customers feel unsafe with you. And it's going to reduce their essentially perspective of you. So they're going to start viewing you in a more negative light. So though you might get views, you might get a bit of a viral post, you're not going to strengthen that relationship with your customers. You also need to understand that your opinions are not brand opinions. Those are separate things. And hiding pricing, hiding policies makes you seem untrustworthy. And of course, you do not want to post things that do not reflect your brand. Remember, your brand is a separate entity to yourself. It has its own personality, it has its own identity. And that's what we're about to talk about. So, what is a brand identity? So, this has the visual elements and, of course, some of the story elements that help identify and distinguish the brand in customers' minds. So, think colors, typography, voice, persona, logos, imagery, etc. Before we move on to the brand identity, I'm going to take a moment to walk you through our brand style guide. A brand style guide or rulebook is something that contains specifications on everything that plays a role in the look and feel of your brand. This template is the Range Africa brand style guide template, and you will be able to download it once you sign up for our newsletter, The Learning Curve. So the brand style guide includes all of the elements of the brand identity. The first part is the brand story, essentially, what is your brand all about? It contains the vision, mission, about us, core values, tagline, and acceptable slogans. The second section is the brand voice and persona. So this includes your brand personality, voice qualities. So, for example, are you friendly, polite, or witty? Spoken and written rules. Examples of acceptable and unacceptable phrases. This section is what you would share with your content writing team or somebody who would be sending a lot of emails for your brand. Up next, we have the brand colors. So you'll have your main color palette. And if you have a monochromatic color palette, it would also be featured here. Up next, we have the brand typography. So here you would have your font name and acceptable font weights and demonstrations of font pairings and font alignment. You'll also have acceptable effects if that is important for your business. Next, we'll have logo guidelines. So you'll have the acceptable formats or layouts of your logo, acceptable color combinations in image form put here, and example layouts of where you want your logo to be placed. Finally, you will have your imagery guidelines. So these are the rules that your imagery will follow, imagery do's and don'ts, and examples, and links to any important templates. So this is what you would give to the person who's making your visual content, so your graphic designer or somebody who might be putting together your website. With your brand style guide, you would also give somebody a folder or access to a folder online that has the important or necessary files like the logo files, the templates indicated, etc. So now that we have gone through the brand style guide template, let us build a brand identity. When you're building a brand identity, it's important to note that you will need to understand the problem that your business solves. You'll need to understand your target market, have a good customer persona or a clear ideal customer. You'll need to have a list of other brands that target the same market. So this is really important because as a small business, you might not have the resources to do the market research. But if you look at brands that are targeting the same market as you, then you can learn from the research that they have done by seeing the content or the kinds of things that they have created. You would also need a clear understanding of your business why and a list of companies in your industry. So you'd also want to see what are the industry standards when it comes to creating a brand identity in your niche. So the top mistakes you want to avoid are borrowing too much from other brands or existing brands. This will make you appear generic. Branding based on what you like. So of course, what you like is important because it's your business, but it should not make up more than 10 to 20% of your branding. Branding by yourself if you can afford a pro. So if you can afford somebody who can actually make your logos for you, please pay them to do so. If you can afford somebody to do the whole branding process, please pay them to do so. Doing poor market research or having poor customer knowledge is a top branding mistake. Also, taking on more than you can handle. So, you need to be realistic with your skill set. It's important to note that we're going to go through this entire section with beginners in mind. So this is for beginners and not for people who are more advanced. And of course, failing to create templates and a brand book for your team. So once you've done this work, you don't want to just put it aside. You need to set your team up for success and set up anybody else who's coming into your business for success by taking everything that you've created and making it very easy for somebody to follow on the path that you've already made, or making it easy for them to replicate the things that you envision. So the elements of a brand identity that we're going to go through today are the brand story, taglines and slogans, color palette, font, also known as typography, aesthetic and imagery, voice and personality, motif, and your logo. And we're going to start off with the brand story. So the brand story contains your vision, mission, values, and about us. So the vision contains your dream, the why of your company. What are you going to become? And if timelines help you think 100 years from now or 200 years from now or something like that. Your mission is your current goal. So you can actually have more than one mission, but because we are bringing this down to a beginner level, have one mission for now and think of it as an objective, something you want to achieve within the next 50 years, within the next fraction of time compared to the time you believe it will take for you to achieve your vision. Of course, once you achieve your mission, you can create a new mission. That is okay. When we look at values, you want to have 1 to 5 actionable values. So the key here is, how do you see these values being embodied every day within your business and your business processes? So a lot of us will list down values and wonder why they're not being reflected in company culture. This is because the values are not actionable, or you have not taken the steps to make these values actionable on a day-to-day basis. And when it comes to your about us, you need to look at the simplest way to describe your company in 1 to 5 lines. You want it to be as simple and as short and as straight to the point as possible. So what do you do? Who's your target market? Why do you do it? 1 line each. Of course, there are other cues you can use for this, but you need to be able to describe your company in 1 to 5 lines. Think of it like your elevator pitch. So we have 2 examples here, but I'm going to focus on the Tesla example. So Tesla's vision is to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy, and their mission is to create the most compelling car company in the 21st century by driving the world's transition to electric vehicles. Tesla actually has various missions. If you go to the mission statement or the mission section on their website, you'll be able to see all of Tesla's missions, and I do encourage you to take a visit there. This mission is achievable. And once they have finished achieving this mission, they can then go back to the drawing board and build onto what is next for them, because the world's transition to sustainable energy, though nice and specific, so we know which area, niche, or industry they're in, they are still quite open-ended, meaning that they can keep achieving things in this space. If we're looking at the brand tagline, which is also a part of your brand story, this is a short phrase that highlights the essence of your brand. So it needs to be easy to remember and repeat. It should resonate with your customers. So coming up with a tagline can take time, and it's okay. So you can keep a record of taglines you like in a Google Doc or on the Notes app of your phone. If you want to brainstorm taglines with help of AI, you can use Notion AI or ChatGPT, and those will help you come up with different tagline ideas without you having to worry so much or stress so much. So it's important to note every brand only has one tagline. So you can't have multiple taglines, you will have one tagline. So for example, Apple has Think Different and Nike has Just Do It. So the brand personality is also a very important aspect. So this is exactly what it sounds like. It is the personality that your brand is going to have. The story is its backstory, kind of its foundation, and the personality is its personality. And it has a brand persona. So a brand persona is what your brand would look and sound like. What would their personality be? So we have 5 persona categories: sincerity, excitement, competence, sophistication, and ruggedness. And these are the 5 categories that we are working with. So we recommend having one main category, or you can have 2, and I'll give you the guidelines for if you're going to have 2, but please do not have more than 2. You do not want to confuse your audience. Imagine if you met somebody with several different dominant personalities. So if you have the personality, for example, of sincerity, or the persona of sincerity, then you'd be able to use the different qualities below sincerity, so the subcategories. But if you wanted to have 2, so for example, you'd have your dominant as sincerity and you'd also have excitement, then you would pick the subcategories that are calling you. So you'd say you are down to earth and imaginative. So that is how you would go about utilizing 2 personas. So we have some examples of different companies that have different personas, and I believe we all know these companies. So when we're looking at this chart, what I'd really like for you to pay attention to is the colors and fonts that you can see coming up. So for example, you'd see certain fonts and looks appearing at sophistication that you don't see under sincerity. So this is really important, and it's definitely going to help out as we go further along. If you have 2 personas, for example, take a look at Google. It is under competence, but the colors are fun and playful, but the font is very official and formal. If you look at the other fonts to its right. So you can definitely play around with that. Or if you look at Disney, very playful font, very serious color. So you can look at how utilizing font and color can help share or essentially express your different brand personas. So how do you define your brand voice? So the persona is part of the personality, but of course, how does your brand sound? So we recommend following these 4 steps. The first being research and reflect on the following: your target audience, what you want your brand to sound like according to the persona you have chosen, and what other brands in your industry are doing. So really immerse yourself in the content. Look at social media, watch ads, and pay attention to how the language makes you feel. The second step is to look at the tone that keeps coming to mind. So is it witty, kind, sarcastic, polite, formal, informal? So try and identify tone, and do not pick more than 3 tones for now. The third step is to look at the elements of your brand's writing style that are important to you, because your brand voice will appear in two ways. So it'll appear in the spoken or audible content, so the content in ads, for example, but it will also appear in your written content, so your emails, your newsletters, your blog posts. So you need to ask yourself, how is this tone and this essentially this vibe you're going for, how are you going to translate it into the writing style? And look at the elements that are important to you and your customer. So do you need perfect punctuation and perfect grammar? Should your sentences be short and quick, or should they be long and verbose? Can you add slang? How informal can you get? And how formal should you be? Write some example sentences of what you're okay with. And if you looked at the style guide, there is a do's and don'ts section. So let us look at the brand aesthetic. So the brand aesthetic is the look and feel of your brand. So the look and feel on your social media page, the look and feel of your website. If you have physical offices, your aesthetic will definitely influence that. In fact, your aesthetic will also influence your logo. So it's really important to understand that your aesthetic should echo your brand persona loud and clear. It'll help with your content design. And as I've already said, it will help with the feel of your brand. So think of the mood and vibe and energy that you want to create. So we recommend creating a mood board with posts, photos, content that is close to the aesthetic and style that you want to have. So collect all of your inspiration from different places. You do not want to be borrowing from one place. You want to borrow from as many places as possible. And you're going to start to notice some colors, design themes, etc., that are going to emerge. So for example, a lot of neutral colors or very minimalist designs or lots of illustrations. Your mood board is like a buffet, so take what you want and leave what you don't. So here are two examples of a mood board, example 1 and example 2, and you can see how they are presenting different colors, different feels, different fonts, different logos. We recommend making your mood board on Canva because it's easier to put together and share across the team. And you can also download it as an image and upload it to the image color picker websites and pick your brand colors from that. However, you can also use Pinterest or any other place where you can collect photos. So let us look at the brand colors. And when we're looking at the brand colors, I'm going to try and use as simple terms as possible. And we will begin with the basic palette. So you will have 3 colors in your basic palette. Sometimes you can have 4. So the first color you will have is your primary color. This is the most dominant color and should be the one that is most associated with your brand. So think of Netflix and KFC red. Range has teal, Safaricom has green. Different brands have their dominant colors, and that's what will become the color associated with your brands. Remember brand associations. The second color is going to be your accent color or your secondary color. It is going to be the second most utilized color in your palette, and you would use it to accent or highlight your brand colors. So right now we have the range green and the Netflix black. And finally, we have neutrals. So this is where you can end up having a third or a fourth color. So you can choose 2 neutrals or have just 1. And these are the colors that you would use for your background, your fonts, etc. And there would be shades of gray, white, beige. On occasion, you can do a dark navy blue. So pure black and pure white are often quite harsh, so that they don't essentially work very well as a neutral. Though, of course, you can break this rule. You can break lots of rules if you like. But for basic guidelines, you would want a shade of white and not a pure white, or a shade of gray, very dark gray, almost black, instead of a pure black because of how dominant they can be. So note, if you're using a monochromatic palette, and I will have an example coming up, you will want to have 5 colors. Your center color will be your main color, so your primary or your dominant color. And then you shall move 2 steps darker and 2 steps lighter, and those will form your other 2 colors. So you can decide how far you want to go in the darker shades and how far you want to go in the lighter shades. But in the end, you'll have two darker shades and two lighter shades than your primary color. And do not worry about color schemes and color theory too much. There's so many websites, we have a few listed here, that you can use to come up with your color palettes. Our favorite is coolers.co. And in the description, I shall link 3 links. The link to Coolers, I'll also link a website that will help you generate colors that are accessible to people who are colorblind, and a document, or essentially a website that really explains accessible colors if you want to read more in depth on that, because we will not be covering that today. So here are examples of color palettes when we have 3 basic and 4 basic colors. So Netflix has 3 with the red, white, and black, and Range has 4 with a shade of white, a shade of gray, and then the teal and the green. When we're looking at monochromatic color palettes, if you look just below, this is Range's teal monochromatic color palette. And so these are the shades of teal that we work with when we're creating monochromatic designs. And you'll see that our primary color is in the center, and we go darker to the left and lighter and brighter to the right. We also have our neutrals clearly put together, our shades of gray, shades of white, and that is what we use whenever we are utilizing our neutral colors. And this is so that we have consistency. So when you are putting together your brand style guide, you will download and put in a photo of your palette like this, and you will include your hex code. So here we have steps to find your palette. I shall not dive too deep in this right now, so feel free to pause and read the steps. This is the second part. Feel free to pause and read the steps. Let's talk about the brand fonts now. So brand fonts can be a little tricky, but they are essentially your brand typography, and there are 3 types of font categories that we'll be using. So we'll have the font for your logo and then your supporting fonts. The reason why I said 3 is because if your font for your logo is too stylized, then you will have 2 supporting fonts, one for your headings and then one for your body, etc. So those are the categories that you would be having for your fonts, but minimum you want to have 2 fonts. Of course, you can also break this rule, but that is what we're going for right now. So important terms to note are font weight, font size, and font styles. Sometimes people will group styles and weight together, but the truth is that there are only 3 font styles: bold, italic, and underline. Font weight is essentially the thickness of the font, and font size, self-explanatory, is the size of the font. There are 5 categories of fonts that are the basic categories: serif, sans serif, script, display, and monospace. We're not including monospace here today. Instead, I've included handwritten, which is a subcategory under script fonts. So serif fonts are classic, traditional. Sans serif are more modern and clean. And the main difference between serif and sans serif fonts is that serif fonts have the serif, which is a tail. So if you look at the C, the I's, the T's, you'll see that they have an extra tail, versus a sans serif where things end quite flat. If you take a moment and pause here, you'll be able to see the different fonts and their uses, their persona, and their vibe. It's very important that you note that the serif and sans serif fonts are the only fonts that can be used in your headings, supporting fonts, and your logos. So they are the only fonts that can be used across the board. So fonts are heavily influenced by your brand style and personality, and things to keep in mind are the readability of the font, the emotion and tone the font provokes, the number of fonts that you use. We do not want to use more than 3, the cohesiveness of the fonts, and the number of font weights. In the comments, we are going to leave some links so that you can be able to find font pairings with ease. We'll also link Google Fonts, which provides free commercial use fonts that you would be able to use. So you don't want to use any fonts. We do recommend Google Fonts because those can be used on your website. They're usually found on Canva with ease, and they are free, so you're not going to have any copyright issues. You'll definitely need, as I said, a main font and a supporting font. Unless your main font or your logo font is too stylized, then, as I repeat, you'll have the logo font, something for your headings, and something for your body. So let us head over to the brand logo. So the brand logo is essentially the symbol of your brand, and if possible, please get a professional to put together your logo. Of course, you can use logo making tools like Canva to create logos. However, you need to make sure that they are copyright friendly, so you need to read the guidelines. So there are many types of logos, and the type is not really related to persona, but the design is. So the types are abstract mark, mascot logos, combination marks, emblem logos, letter marks, pictorial marks, and word marks. If you are a beginner, you want to be leaning to an abstract mark, or word mark, or a pictorial mark. Of course, you can also try a letter mark, but the mascot logos, combination marks, emblems, etc. can be a little tricky for you to create. Unless, of course, you have skills with graphic design, then feel free, go ahead, make your logo. But if you don't, this is the easier area for you to use. And of course, you want to make sure that if you are doing a mascot logo, you do hire somebody like an illustrator to make your mascot so that you can trademark it. Range recommends, with as little jargon as possible, having a main version of your logo and a mini version of your logo. And I'll show you examples. We also recommend having all the color combinations previously determined and ensure that that enters your style guide. You'll also have a folder containing all of these files. So the mini version is on the left with the Google G, and the main version is a full Google. You can actually get away with having just the G, and this is what would appear on your website favicon. It could appear as your profile picture for your brand, etc. Of course, you need to make sure you utilize the color palette, brand persona, brand aesthetic, etc. here. So let's finalize with other brand elements before we move on to the most frequently asked questions. So there are two brand elements which I want to describe, which is the motif and the slogans. So the motif is a pattern that you utilize in your brand design, and it is optional. It should reflect your brand persona and be consistent. So think of the design elements that you find on luxury bags. The slogan is the marketing phrases or a marketing phrase that focuses on a product campaign or the company. So you can have several slogans. So several slogans, but only one tagline. So let's take the time to address the most common questions that were brought to us in the survey that we shared out. The first is branding for a product or a service line. You need to think about the story for your product line or your service line. So this would not be for an individual product, but for a line of products. So you need to ask, what values does this product embody? What is its mission? What is your product solving? What problem? Why does it exist? And this would form the basis for your product line or your service story. Utilize the primary brand identity elements to create other branding elements that are specific to the product line or service brand that you're creating. Of course, if you want this line of products or this new service that you've introduced to be separate to your parent brand, then you would not use the primary brand identity elements or the parent brand identity elements. You would instead create a new brand from scratch. So you would think about how Dasani is very different to Fanta, very different to Coca-Cola, yet they're all owned by the same parent company. The next thing has to do with brand materials. So this came up because a lot of people were asking about how they would brand differently depending on the different customers they have or the different areas of business that you're in. And it's important to note that your branding steps are actually the same across all businesses. It is the materials that change according to your industry. So other words for brand materials are actually marketing materials. So these are the materials that are specific to your business or product that would influence your brand identity. So you think packaging labels, pitch decks, templates, business profiles, etc. So you want to make a list of your marketing materials or your branding materials, and then ask yourself, do I have to take this into account during my branding process? So if you need labels, you need to ask yourself whether or not this is important, because that will influence the type of logo that you are going to use. It'll also influence what you will ask your logo designer for. We also had coming up with a name. In fact, this was the most asked question, and we would recommend that you can actually come up with a name for your product line, etc., last. After you've done the entire journey, you might find that a certain name or a certain idea keeps coming up, or it might inspire your name in the end. So you don't have to start with a name, but you do definitely need a name by the time you're finishing. So you can do this over time, and you can utilize tools like Namelix, Notion AI, Bing AI, and ChatGPT. I will link these all in the description. Ensure that the name is easy to spell and recall, and don't get frustrated with the time it takes. Remember that names do not need to have a deep meaning, so don't get stuck there. I mean, think Apple, not a super deep meaning, but they use their branding to create something for their name and their business. Ask people from your target market what they think of when you share your name with them. This is really important because you need to know whether you want to reinforce what they're thinking of or the association they have with that word, or if you need to go against it. So, for example, with range, a lot of people would think weapons. A gun range, a shooting range. So we want to go against this messaging. And so our branding, pretty much we know we have to go opposite. So no rugged persona for us, for example. Finally, we had the question on what next? What do I do? Is there a clear journey to follow? And we have one. First, make a list. So you need to list the brand materials and how they would impact your brand identity, then list the brand identity elements too. The order in which we have gone over these elements is the order I recommend following when it comes to creating them. The second step is you want to handle the basics. So ensure that you understand your target market, your business why, and of course, the problem you are solving. And then, of course, you want to cover the bare minimum. So the bare minimum are your brand story, brand persona, and brand aesthetics. That is something you definitely want to do in-house. Even if you've hired somebody, you're going to work very closely with them in these steps. The third, you're going to ask the big question. Are you going to do this in-house or are you going to pay a professional? If you are paying a professional, you need to look at your finances and the money that you have available to you. And you need to ask yourself, do you have enough to outsource a few elements of the identity or the whole identity? You can use Fiverr and Upwork to check and compare rates. So you definitely don't want to start looking at the budget that others have set. Look inside and see what money do we actually have, and then go from there. If you're not paying a professional, you definitely want to allocate remaining work across the team. So if you can outsource the entire process, please do so and use the guide to identify. If you can outsource the entire process of creating the identity, please do that and use a guide to identify core elements you need to receive from your graphic designer or brand developer. If you can only outsource bits, then please outsource the logo, fonts, and or the colors in this order, the logo being the most important to outsource if you are able to do so. It's also really important that whoever is doing this work for you gives you the files that are required. So you don't want, for example, the logo to only receive PNG files. You need the Photoshop files or the Illustrator files so that later on, if you need to hire somebody to make adjustments to this logo, you can. Fourth is equity and image. So you need to look at your customer journey and you need to ask yourself the following questions. Please pause and read these questions. Fifth is the materials. So once you have done all of this work, you need to create the materials that you would need and make sure to include templates for new members to use. So we at Range actually have a checklist, and we will link the checklist in the description. Thank you so much for getting to the end of today's session. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below. We are going to link workshop sessions that would be very helpful to you. For example, our business plan session, which would help you with the unique value proposition, and our goal setting session as we release the recordings of them. In addition, we're also going to link the resources in the description. And if you would like a copy of our style guide template, please sign up for our newsletter, The Learning Curve. The link will be in the description as well.